Chris and I are going to tag team this last presentation, and as a small fruit horticulturalist, I was asked and thought I would just provide a quick overview of tips for nutrient management, because as we're talking about water quality, particularly with the last discussion about manure, nutrient management in our berry crops is an important component we need to consider. Now, in some of my discussions with a lot of the berry growers in this area, you are all extremely knowledgeable on nutrient management practice. So this presentation is really meant to be an overview and a reminder of nutrient management in our berry crops, as well as some of the resources. So again, a little disclosure, this is not intended to be a comprehensive review of nutrient management in berry crops, just to remind everyone of key concepts and the available resources that you have. So when we're thinking about a nutrient management plan, one of the first steps that we need to be asking ourselves is some of these key questions. Number one is, what are the requirements for nutrients for a particular crop, as well as the age of the crop? The next question we want to ask ourselves, particularly in a pre-plant situation, is what's presently available in our soils? The next one is, what factors are going to influence our uptake and our mobility? And when I think about this question, I often think about water. We can apply nutrients, but oftentimes, if they're not in solution, then they're not going to be taken up by our plants. So we need to make sure that when we're applying nutrients, we're also having proper soil moisture. Next is, when are the nutrients needed by the plant? We want to make sure that we're applying our nutrients at the time of uptake so that we're meeting the demand of that plant. And then we also want to make sure that we're applying the nutrient in sufficient quantities. And then we also have to think about what are sources of nutrients and what are the potential benefits, as well as some of the considerations we need to have. And then a good question that we always should be asking ourselves is our current nutrient management plan working, and how can we optimize it and refine it so it works better for us? So this is my quick nutrient 101 or mineral nutrition 101 slide, just so that we're all on the same page. So a nutrient is considered essential if it's utilized and needed for the entire growth and development of a plant. From a grower standpoint, really, it's the nutrients we need to produce a harvestable crop that keeps us economically viable. So we have macronutrients, those are nutrients needed in large quantities, and then we have micronutrients, those are needed in small quantities. And then it's important to remember that nutrients differ in their mobility in the plants. We have mobile nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and chloride. These move in the phloem, so these are the pipes in the plant that move sugars, or those products of plant photosynthesis. And the symptoms of these mobile nutrient deficiencies are on older leaves, because when the plant requires these nutrients on new growing points, it'll mobilize them from older sources or older leaves. So we'll see the deficiency on older leaves. This contrasts from immobile nutrients. Calcium, boron, sulfur, iron, manganese, copper, and zinc are immobile nutrients. These move in the xylem, and the xylem really is the pipes in the plant that moves water, and they move with the transpirational stream. So from the roots up through the plant body and out through the leaves. It's not like the phloem. The phloem can move in different directions, which contributes to the mobility of mobile nutrients. The main thing is that we see deficiency of immobile nutrients on newer leaves, because those nutrients can't be remobilized and utilized at the point of need in a plant. Now, nutrient management really focuses on making sure we're applying the right amount of nutrients at the time that we need it, and there's some certain things that we need to be aware of and consider. One thing that I like to just remind everyone is that when we're applying nutrients, we need to make sure that we're applying nutrients that are supplying what we have removed from our harvested biomass. And our harvested biomass can mean our prunings or our fruit that we've harvested, as well as leaves that might have dropped and have blown away and removed or been left from the system. So we need to replenish those nutrients every year to make sure that our plantings remain productive. So these are some really interesting figures that Dr. Bernadine Strick and some of her program people have developed through their research, that for blueberry, per ton of fruit, the amount of nitrogen we're removing in our harvested yield is about 1.3 to 2.7 pounds. And then from our prunings, we're looking at about 14 pounds of nitrogen per acre that we're removing. Some of this can be returned to our system if we're incorporating it or flailing that material back in, but the main thing is that this is removed, and when we're reapplying our nutrients, we need to replenish what was lost from the system. Likewise, these are our numbers from raspberry. We're looking at about 3.5 pounds of nitrogen removed per ton of fruit, and then for our prunings, we're looking at about 17.3 pounds of nitrogen. So we have these numbers for nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. If you're interested in some of these numbers, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to provide them. Now, some of this information, as well as background research, has led to our development of our nutrient application guidelines for our different berry crops. These are our nitrogen application guidelines for blueberry. And again, I don't want to belabor this. It's just a reminder that we have this information out here that can really be useful in refining your nutrient management program if you need it, and that we have recommendations based on systems that are fertigated, that are utilizing granular fertilizers, and then we can optimize it based on the age of the planting and what type of size that plant is and how much yield it is contributing, so that we can really refine and make sure that we're not applying nutrients in excess, or we're not applying too little nutrients. And then these are the numbers for raspberry. We really haven't developed a lot of the research in terms of fertigation, in terms of how much we should be applying and when. But the general recommendation for nitrogen is in the establishment year, we're looking at about 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And once our plantings are established, we're looking at 50 to 80 pounds of nitrogen, and we're splitting that. The first half right around the time the primocanes start to emerge and grow, and the second half about 1 month before our harvest. And then it's also just to bear in mind that our two main berry crops, raspberry and blueberry, they're grown in different types of soil conditions, different types of pHs. Raspberries prefer more slightly acidic to neutral pH. They're nitrate feeders, whereas our low pH, acidic or calcifuge crops like blueberries, they're ammonium feeders. So that when we're applying our nutrients, we want to make sure that we're applying the right source of nitrogen for these particular crops so that they can take it up. And then here's just a quick review. There's a lot of different fertilizers out there that we utilize in berry production. We have dry, granular versus liquid. We have soil versus foliar applied. We have organic and synthetic fertilizers that we're all using. Now, if organic is an option or a particular fertilizer that we're using, one of the questions we're asking is it animal-based, or is it plant-based, or is it fresh and composted? The real take-home message for me is when we're developing nutrient management plans, we need to consider the type of nutrient. That'll bear into how we apply it and how, when we're developing our management plan. And then also just to be careful about some of our organic sources of nutrients. They vary in the amount of nutrients they have within a batch, between batches, and within years. So really it's recommended to make sure that you're testing your organic sources of nutrients so that you're applying your products at amount and you're delivering the amount of nitrogen or other product nutrients that you're desiring to. Some really interesting work that has come out of Dan Sullivan's program at Oregon State University is related to the use of animal manures and compost and blueberry production. And it's just a word of caution that if you're utilizing animal source manures or compost in blueberry, we need to make sure that we're testing them and we're being aware of the potential ramifications that their usage can have. So blueberries are very sensitive to pH. They like acidic pHs, and they're also very sensitive to salts. And unfortunately, a lot of animal source compost and manures have high pH, which is demonstrated in this table, and high salts or electrical conductivity. So number one, if you're thinking about utilizing animal source manures or compost in blueberry, have it tested, and bear in mind that there could be some ramifications that you might have with utilizing these products. Here we have, this is a reproduction of a table that Dan Sullivan and I developed for a Watcomag monthly publication that we had about a month ago, or a year ago to date, where we're looking at the pH of dairy, horse, yard, leaf, and mint compost. And you can see the pHs are all above 6. And really for blueberry, we want our compost to be 6 or below, so we're not increasing our soil pH for blueberry. And then the electrical conductivity was also really high. The lowest we had was for horse compost at leaf 2.2, but then horse was 3.3. These are all pretty high. And compare that with what we typically are utilizing in blueberry production, peat or sawdust. They have a pH of 4.8 or 5.2 respectively, and a much lower electrical conductivity or salt content. So again, if you're using these products, be aware of this aspect, and that if you're utilizing them, you might need to acidify them to make sure that they're within the pH that you need. So soil tests are a great way to assess nutrients within your soil, and they're particularly useful in a pre-plant situation. We have different sufficiency recommendations for our different crops. These are the nutrient sufficiency in a pre-plant situation for blueberry. And then here are the recommendations for raspberry. Again, we have all of this information available, and we're happy to share it with you. And then in addition to the pre-plant soil test or annual soil testing, we have our post-harvest soil testing. And these are really useful for manure cropping systems. So this particular test looks at the amount of plant available nitrogen in the nitrate form that's available in that first foot of soil. And this is measured right after harvest. And this is really useful in terms of telling us a little bit more about our nitrogen management program within our fields. Because if we have a lot of nitrate left in our soils after harvest, that is an indication of that we're applying more than what the crop demands. And vice versa, if we have low nitrate, that can indicate, maybe we need to be rethinking about how we're applying our nutrients and our nitrogen, so we're adding a little bit more. The main thing with these types of tests is that it quantifies the balance between the nitrogen supplied in manure and the demand of the crop. And it can help identify imbalances and where in your production system you might have fields that will respond to changes in your manure management program. Next, another great tool for looking at nutrient management in your field situation is leaf sampling. We recommend doing these once a year and also sampling at the correct time. And the timing is important because we collect these leaf samples when the nutrients are most stable in the plant, and that happens to be for both raspberry and blueberry about late July, or the 15th of July to the 15th of August. And it's also important not just to collect at the right time, but to also collect at the right tissue. And the right tissue is the most recently expanded leaf. And on blueberry, those are the leaves that are on shoots beneath the fruiting clusters. And then for raspberry, we're looking at leaves on the primocanes about 12 inches or a foot from the apex. If you are sampling or wanting to look at problematic plants, you want to make sure that you're sampling them separately from the healthy plants. It can be useful for comparing and contrasting, and then also to sample cultivars separately. A few other comments about leaf tissue sampling, as well as soil sampling. I highly recommend contacting the lab that you plan to use first, particularly if they're a new lab to you, just to make sure that your protocols, your methodology is in sync with theirs so that you get the best results possible. Also, don't wash your leaves is my general recommendation. The reason for that being is that the potassium in the leaves is soluble. It'll move out of the leaf tissue when you wash them, and it can give you a false reading of your potassium levels in your leaves. And also to be aware that fungicides, foliar nutrients, even dust on the leaves can impact your tissue results. So just be aware of those, have those a part of your record keeping and your own experiential knowledge. And then when you're interpreting the tests, remember what you've observed in the field, your records on your nutrient management program, and then also observations, notes, and your own experiences. Combine that when you're interpreting your results. Now, these next two slides just again give you a little bit of an overview of the recommended leaf sufficiency levels for our nutrients. The main thing I want to highlight without going through all of these details is that we have some revised tissue standards for blueberry based on some work that Dr. Bernadine Strick has done at Oregon State University, where we've changed the sufficiency levels for phosphorus, potassium, calcium, copper, and lastly aluminum. We have some recommendation for sufficiency levels now. And then again, these are our recommendations for red raspberry. So just a general summary about this portion of my presentation. Some good tools to monitor your nutrient management program is just keep good records. Record keeping can be really helpful in helping you interpret and adjust and refine your nutrient management program. Soil testing we recommend every 2 to 4 years unless there are specific problems or concerns that you have or regulatory reasons that might require you to test more frequently. Tissue testing, we recommend doing that annually and to compare the results with standards that have been developed and your own record keeping. And again, I really take a boots on the ground approach. When you're looking at all these data, really pair it and compare it with your in-field observations and your own experiences. And then if you have questions, to seek out resources. And the last portion of my presentation will just highlight some of those resources that are available to you. We have the Nutrient Management Plan for blueberries in Oregon. This is the best and most comprehensive nutrient management guideline for the Pacific Northwest. It's currently in the state of being revised. And then likewise, we have one for caneberries. I mentioned soil nitrate testing. There's another publication that Dan Sullivan developed. It goes a little bit more in detail in terms of how you collect samples and what this particular test means. And so this is also available to you. And then lastly, there's people that, we can provide these documents for you if you can't find them online or you don't want to look online. We're happy to help address any other questions. There's myself and then Mr. Chris Benedict. So with that, are there any questions? And Chris is the... Okay.
You'll be around for a little bit. So
oh, yeah.
People have any follow-ups.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
Lisa.
you. Yep.